It's the 2022 World Cup.
It's the squad update for Tunisia. Hello and welcome to the International Soccer Preview by Soccerphiles Canada. I'm Kevin and today we'll be updating Tunisia's squad for the 2022 World Cup. The final squads are out, so here is the promised update mediacast where we look at the selections, the non-selections, the surprises, and the injury updates that we made in our full team podcast when we went through all the candidates, where we gave career and participation information and formed our predictions there on the likelihood of players making the squad. So today we'll check how accurate our predictions were and we'll update any recent games and information. Check the show notes for links to that full player mediacast, as well as the group mediacast where we took a close look at the team, their history and their prospects for this tournament. But let's get started. If you're looking for the short version, you can jump to the end where we give a summary of the selections and injuries, and also we reassess our prediction of starters. All right, well, we are, I should explain my shirt first. Of course, I'm wearing a Canada shirt because Tunisia and Canada have the common interest of beating Morocco. So naturally, the Canadian shirt was okay. This is just my hokey excuse for not having a Tunisia shirt, and I'm sorry about that. I'll work on my impoverished collection, and I'm going to move on before I embarrass myself any further. Okay, let's take a look at formation. So we are focused on the recent games here, but we'll look at the whole picture since the 2021 African Cup in January 2022 to see if we can kind of see a pattern in their play. So we do see a pattern in their play. It took them a while in the African Cup, after going through three different formations in the group stage, to arrive at the 4-3-3, which they have strongly preferred since then. So they used it in the two playoff games with Mali, and they actually used a 4-4-2 in the 2023 African Cup qualifying games in June, but went back to the 4-3-3 for a couple of friendlies, played in a kind of a mini tournament in Japan, a mini international tournament, where they used a 4-3-3 in both of their games. And now the recent games which we're focused on, a 4-3-3 in games 3 and 4, and in their most recent game in November, a 3-4-2-1. So switching it up there at the end. Let's take a look at those games. The first one was a friendly in France, played against Comoros. Most of Comoros' players playing in France. That was a 1-0 win for Tunisia. And then they played a friendly in France against Brazil. These were both in September, and that was a 5-1 loss. Ouch. But no surprise against Brazil. And then recently they played a closed-door game in Tehran, Iran, and did well there to win 2-0. That was the 3-4-2-1 formation. And in terms of players for those games, those last three friendlies, we'll be referring to them as the recent friendlies in this media cast. Yeah, not a lot of experimentation there, just maybe switching around the players who they're considering for starters, and a few players actually coming back, especially into that last game in November. So we'll talk about them during this podcast. I always say podcast, but I should say mediacast because it's also on YouTube. And for those YouTube watchers, we actually do run a little graphic basically shining up the names that we mentioned in the mediacast. Okay, well, let's begin with the manager, Jalal Kadri, and he has been the manager just since 2022, so taking over recently. The previous manager was, I don't know actually if his contract was up or whether they fired him. But their quarterfinal finish in the 2022 African Cup make that a semi-final finish, actually, which wasn't bad at all. So that wasn't a particularly bad finish for them, but nevertheless, they replaced the manager with Dalal Khadri. So he has been in charge for a short time, but we'll call him a starter here, or we'll call him a selection here, because he will remain their manager through the cup. Okay, let's look at goalkeepers, and we have okay, so what we're going to do here is name the candidates, and then we'll say which ones did and didn't make the final squad, and we'll finish the section with a summary on the positions. So we're starting with goalkeepers, and we have definite candidates, Bashir Ben Said and Ayman Daman. We have three possible candidates in Farouk Ben Mustafa, Ali Jamal, and Mohamed Sedki Debchi. And we have one player who seems to be off the squad, Muez Hassan. So let's look and see who made it. Definite candidates, Bashir Ben Said and Ayman Daman, both made the squad. None of the possible candidates made it. So Farouk Ben Mustafa, Ali Jamal, and Mohamed Debchi not making the squad. However, the player who seemed to be off the squad, Muez Hassan, was brought back. So he actually had last appeared for the national team in the December 2021 African Cup. Before unexpectedly being named to the final squad here. So it was not part of the African Cup 2021 in January 2022, but recalled for that. But they outdid themselves one step further by recalling veteran Ayman Mathlouthi as their fourth keeper for the cup. So let me tell you a little bit. Actually, we didn't cover Muez Hassan much in the full player podcast because he seemed to be off the squad. So I'll just go over his information. As I said, last appeared for the squad in the December 2021 Arab Cup before being called up to the squad here, and has been on the squad since 2018 with 20 caps. And he's only 27 years old and plays for Club Africain in Tunisia. He also played in France. He was born in France. So he played for Stade Brest and Nice in France. Nice was actually his youth club. And he did a short stint in England with Southampton in 2017 on loan there from Nice. In terms of tournaments, he was the starter in the 2018 World Cup, Muez Hassan. But he was subbed out injured just 15 minutes into the game and out for the rest of the tournament there. And he was also selected for the 2019 African Cup, and the opposite thing happened there. He was the backup keeper, but he got the starting position for games 2 to 6. So it was a surprise, actually, that he wasn't called up for the 2021 African Cup, a shock even. But here he is, having not participated in any games since the 2021 African Cup. Here he is back in the World Cup. The other player, and we're only going to introduce players who we didn't introduce in the previous podcast, is Ayman Mathlouthi. So Ayman Mathlouthi, had last appeared on the bench in March 2019. And he was actually the captain of Tunisia, playing all the way from 2007 to 2019, and had amassed 72 caps. And he's currently 38 years old. but still playing club soccer for Étoile du Sahel in Tunisia since 2020, and he played mostly in Tunisia, but for a couple of teams in Saudi Arabia also during his time. So he's a long history with Tunisia in terms of tournaments, first appearing in the 2008 African Cup, where he was on the roster but saw no action. But he became the starting keeper in 2010, the 2010 African Cup, starting all 3 games there, and in the 2012 Cup. He was actually on the bench for the 2013 African Cup, but resumed his starting position in 2015, and was actually the captain of the 2017 African Cup and the 2018 World Cup, although in that 2018 World Cup he appeared only in Game 3, starting that game. Starting that game. So both of those players brought in Muez Hassan and Ayman Mathlouthi, and maybe not as surprising as the fact that they were brought in was the fact that they were left off if they were still active. So I mean, they had been pretty big players for the club, and one wonders why they kind of fell out of use for the national team. So 4 goalkeepers there: Bashir Ben Said and Ayman Daman, and Muez Hassan and Ayman Mathlouthi. Now I kind of wonder if these veterans were brought back in, were brought back in to kind of coach the younger goalkeepers, because Ben Said and Daman are both new to the national team since 2021 or 2022, and they have 12 caps between them. So I wonder if the veterans were kind of brought in to support them, or whether the veterans will actually take the starting spot. And in summary of the keepers, still a bit of indecision on the keeper. It was Ben Said during and after the African Cup. That itself was a surprise, that he had kind of just come in and seized the starting spot. And he played 4 games after the African Cup, but then Daman played both of the June games. So we were wondering, okay, well, where does that leave us for the goalkeeper when we were doing the full player podcast? But Ben Said played the first of the September games, and then Daman played the second and the November friendly. So we're still kind of unsure who the starting keeper is going to be. We'll talk about that at the end of the podcast, though. So interesting things going on with the goalkeepers there. And let's move on to the defense, starting with central defenders. So here we have a lot of candidates, 2 definite candidates: Montasar Talbi and Bilal Ifa. The likely candidate, Nader Gandri. And then 4 possible candidates we had in Dylan Braun, Omar Rakik, Adam Ben Lamine, and Ala Graham. 1 possible but unlikely in Jasir Kermiri, and a couple of players who seem to be off the squad, Mohamed Ali Yakubi and Mark Lamptey. And we also had 1 injured player, Yassine Meria, who was kind of on a long-term injury. So to be honest, we weren't sure where he would fit into the squad. He was a veteran, but he was off the team for quite a while with an injury. And actually, we only discovered in preparation for the podcast that he had been injured, but he was over that injury, so we weren't sure where that left him, because he wasn't selected for the June games. Anyway, I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit. Well, let's just go through those players again and say who made the squad. So Montasar Talbi and Bilal Ifa are 2 definite candidates, were selected. Nader Gandri, our likely candidate, also selected. I feel good about this one, because even though Dylan Braun hadn't played since the 2021 African Cup, I suspected they might bring him back in, and woohoo, I was right. So ding, 1 point for me on that one. However, Omar Rakik was not selected. Adam Ben Lamine and Ala Graham also, not selected for the squad. In fact, none of the players under here, except for one, were selected. So possible but unlikely, Jasir Khmiri, not selected. And the players who seem to be off the squad, Mohammed Ali Yakubi and Mark Lamptey, also not selected. However, the injured player, Yassine Meria, was selected, and we did consider that a possibility, although I think we didn't give it enough due in the full-length podcast. So here's the story with him. He had been out with a cruciate ligament injury from January until June 2022. And, he had recovered by September. But he wasn't selected for the squad for the September games. However, he did return to the squad for the November games. That was true of the two returning veteran goalkeepers above, just coming back for the November games. So interesting to consider what was in the manager's mind. I almost feel like it was a bit of panic bringing back these veterans, you know. Anyway, Yassine Mariah making the squad, and that leaves them with 5 central defenders. And we're not sure whether those late additions, Dylan Braun and Yassine Maria, both experienced veterans, will change who had been looking like the starting keepers. But let's review the position. So like goalkeepers, this too seems to be shifting sands. With the possibility of veterans coming back in and seizing the position. So we had Aoife and Talby, and they did start the first September friendly together. But what I mean by we had them was that we had predicted that they would be the starters. And so they were in the first September friendly. We had thought Braun and Maria were off the squad, but Braun did return for the second game in September, starting alongside Talby. And finally, we had noted Gandry was making inroads, and he came back to replace Aoife in the November friendly. That was who Braun had replaced, so Aoife kind of out of the picture there. But it was a 3-man defence, and Yassine Maria was the third man brought in there. So things changed quite a bit. The long and short of it is that Aoife seems to be out there in the recent friendlies. Talby has remained in defence. And, Braun, Maria and Gandry all making appearances, kind of confusing the matter as to who is going to start alongside Talby. Whew, can't believe I got through that, but there we have it. And we'll come back at the end actually to discuss starters, where we'll probably repeat what I just said. Okay, let's move on to left backs. And we have definite candidate Ali Abdi and also Ali Maloul at the definite level. 2 possible candidates in Usama Haddadi and Rami Kaib. And possible but unlikely candidate Mohammed Amin Ben Hamida. And of these, the last 3 that I mentioned were not selected. So Mohammed Amin Ben Hamida, and also possible candidates Usama Haddadi and Rami Kaib not making it. Leaving us with Ali Abdi and Ali Maloul as the players on the left. And both of those making it, by the way. I don't think I said that. And the position rotated amongst all 3. That is Abdi, Maloul, and Haddadi. But Abdi and Maloul always kind of looked more likely than Haddadi. So his non-selection helps to narrow things down a bit, but doesn't help us decide a friendly, because Abdi and Maloul each started one of the friendlies, and an out-of-position player started the other recent friendly. So Abdi and Maloul there, the left backs, and we'll try to work out who is the starter at the end of the podcast. For right backs, we have a definite candidate Mohamed Drager, and a possible candidate Hamza Mathlouthi, same name as the goalkeeper, so be careful not to confuse them. And a player who seems to be off the squad in Wajdi Keshrida. And the selections there were Mohamed Drager selected, Hamza Mathlouthi not selected, so I guess you don't have to worry about that confusion, and Wajdi Keshrida brought in from the cold. He had seemingly been off the squad, last appearing for the national team in November 2021, but yet another player brought back, another kind of veteran brought back, so we should kind of cover his bio because we didn't do players who seem to be off the squad in much detail. So he last appeared for the national team on the bench in November 2021, as I said. Had actually only been with the team since 2019, but had earned 18 caps in that time. And he's 27 years old, and he plays for Salernitana in Italy since 2021, having moved from Etoile du Sahel in Tunisia, where he played for 5 years. He was selected for the African Cup, where he started and finished games 1 to 5, but after that was relegated to the bench. And sorry, that's the African Cup 2019. Yeah, so they that game 7 would have been a third place match there. And for the 2021 African Cup, he wasn't selected, but that was due to COVID. He had COVID, so not selected there. So Wajdi Kashrida, not too long ago, was firmly part of the squad and then was off, but now making a comeback like so many we've seen. Mostly in defense, I should say, so we won't have a lot more of these players coming back. In terms of the position then, Drager seems to have laid claim to the position and perhaps reaffirmed that by starting 2 of the 3 recent friendlies. However, Keshridi, who we know dominated the position in the past, was selected, so may pose a challenge for the position, just like the other veterans who are coming back. So interesting decisions here by the manager. Let's move on to defensive midfielders, and we're going to begin with the likely candidate for Gianni Sassi, and then one player who seems to be off the squad, Mohamed Amin Ben Amour, and he was not selected. So Mohamed Amin Ben Amour not there, but for Gianni Sassi selected. So we'll come back to him after doing the central midfielders here, because we often do them together as their positions overlap. So we have a definite candidate, Anis Ben Slimane and Isa Leidouni as definite candidates. And we have likely candidates, Mohamed Ali Ben Romdane and Elias Skiri as likely candidates. Possible candidate Galen Chalali, and possible but unlikely Mutez Zadem. And Mutez Zadem is the only one among these players who didn't make it. So Anis Ben Slimani and Asa Leidouni, the definite candidates, made it. Ben Romdan and Skiri, the likely candidates, both made it. And Galen Chalali also making it. And basically, I'll tell you right here that we tried to kind of separate midfield into central, right, and left, but the problem is they switch around so much that it ends up being kind of pointless. And so we decided just to kind of put them all in a clump here and deal with them, and make you aware that they do move around. So moving back to Sassi Ferjani, for example, sometimes he's not really a defensive midfielder any more than the others. But he sometimes plays on the left wing, so very fluid in the midfield there. I will actually, so I'll summarize the positions here. It's really been a mix and match of these players, but Ben Slimani and Leidouni kind of emerged as the prime candidates by June. So from September, Ben Slimani had given way to Skiri as a central midfielder at least, but Ben Slimani kind of went on to play right attacking midfield. But Leidouni has remained pretty consistent throughout, and that was the pairing in the final game in November, Skiri and Leidouni. But again, they all kind of appear. So, we just kind of we get a shuffling of them in the cup, and it could be kind of any one of them. But as I said, Leidouni there fairly consistently, and Skiri coming in at the end. Okay, so when we talk about left midfielders here, yeah, we do have a category for left midfielders, but I'll just say that we moved them all because all of the left midfielders were actually attacking midfielders. So Youssef Nsakni, the captain, is coded as a left midfielder, but we moved him to left winger position. We moved Wabi Kazri to attacking midfield, and Saif Adin Kawi we moved to the right winger because that's where they play. So I'll just summarize the left midfield position, although we have no players to talk about here. And the players, yes, okay, we move them all. Yes, and if you think about it, the more defensive left midfielders in a 4-3-3 position will kind of play across the middle, and these players we're talking about playing more on the forward end of that 4-3-3. Okay, so let's move on to those forwards. We're going to combine left wingers and left attacking midfielders here. And right midfield is the same as left midfield there. So the actual winger position has been rarely used. I'll just say that right now. So the players we're going to talk about here, though coded as left wingers, tend to play left attacking midfielder and left forward. So let's take a look at these candidates, and we have I don't have it on the graphic. Definite candidates, though, in let me grab. You've got to grab a graphic to say that they're definite. Okay, Naeem Sliti and Youssef Nsakni, the two definite candidates. And we go all the way down to players who seem to be off the squad with Ali Youssef and Sebastian Tunekti. And neither of those plays made it, Youssef or Tunekti, so we'll remove them from the list, leaving us with Naeem Sliti and Youssef Nsakni. So I'll summarize that position by saying Sliti kind of played in the upper left quadrant in the middle, in the early part of the period, but he has played in other positions since. And in the second half, Nsakni kind of dominated that left attacking midfielder / left forward position. Okay, on the right side, we have moved Firas Ben Larbi here. He's coded as an attacking midfielder, but plays more as a right attacking midfielder or right forward. But he's only a possible candidate along with Elias Achouri. And then we have one possible but unlikely candidate in Fakhreddin Ben Youssef. And in fact, none of these players made the squad. They had only been at the possible but unlikely level. And we're going to find actually that the players who did play right wing are attacking midfielders or forwards who we're going to look at soon. So again, the right winger position itself not used that much. Okay, let's move on to those attacking midfielders and forwards, and we have them kind of grouped in a bigger category of forwards. And so we'll start with attacking midfielders. And here we have a likely candidate, Wabi Kazri and Hannibal Mejbri. We have a possible candidate, Hamza Rafia, and we have three possible but unlikely candidates in Saad Baguir and Murtada Ben Oanes and Saif Adin Kawi. And finally, we have the retired Yassine Chikawi, who I think we covered in the full-length podcast, but we're not going to talk about him here because he was not selected. And in fact, none of the possible but unlikely candidates were selected. So we've removed Saad Bakouir, Mortada Ben Ouanes, and Saif Adin Kawi from the list. And in fact, even the possible candidate, Hamza Rafia, not selected. So we're really whittling things down here and are left with just the two likely candidates, Wabi Kazri and Hannibal Mejbri. So let's summarize the position. And in fact, the central attacking midfield role does not exist in the 4-3-3 formation. So we rarely see that role used. Wabi Kazri sometimes plays as a right forward, but recently it's been central midfielder Ben Slimani or Slimane, I'm not sure, playing in that role. And Kazri has been playing as a centre forward or elsewhere on the field. He's always moved around a lot. But I should say he's only played about half the games, which is why we had him as a likely candidate in the first place. Actually, we probably would have put him as a likely candidate based solely on his a possible candidate based solely on his recent participation, but it's Wabi Kazri, so we think that kind of moves him up a notch, I guess. Okay, and Wabi Kazri kind of in and out though, and Mejbri played the right attacking midfield role in the November game. I like Hannibal Mejbri. He kind of made a good impression on me in the African Cup there. So I'm hoping to see him on the field. Anyway, let's move on. We have one candidate as a secondary striker, and I guess we could consider him more like an attacking midfielder. That's Issam Jebali, and he did make the squad. Issam Jebali, and we'll come. Yes. I'm sorry, Wabi Kazri and Hannibal Mejbri I hadn't highlighted in green. Okay, and finally we move on to forwards. So we have a definite candidate in Safadine Jaziri and a likely candidate in Taha Yassin Kanisi, and then three players who seem to be off the squad, Firas Chauat. I think it should be illegal to have 5 vowels in a row in somebody's name, but there was it was a Tunisian goalkeeper or from that area of North Africa, one goalkeeper who had 7 vowels in a row in his name. And, I'm an English teacher, so I just can't have it. You just can't have that many vowels in a row. Anyway, Firas Chauat gets away with that, but he doesn't get away with being selected for the cup. So, we remove him from the list. Nabil Makmi is another, seems to be off the squad, and he wasn't selected. And finally, Johan Tuskar, not selected, but we do have a note on him. He had an ankle injury, which he picked up in early October, and he actually did play for 5 minutes in the early November. No, that was not for the national team. That was for his club. But he went straight back onto the injury list with the same ankle injury. But we had him as a seemingly off the squad candidate anyway. So I'm sure that won't upset the Tunisian system that much. So we're left with just 2 forwards here, Saifuddin Jaziri and Taha Yassin Kanisi, and of course Wabi Kazri kind of figuring among them. So let's summarize the position. Jaziri looked like he was securing a position after the African Cup games, but the recent friendlies in September and November kind of showed the truth of it. And the truth of it was that Kazri, Jaziri, and Kanisi each played one of the 3 games. So that kind of rotation being very much the system for Tunisia, making it hard to kind of pin down a starter. Or maybe the truth is there is no starter, and they will rotate. So we'll have to see. Okay, that finishes the player-by-player section. And now let's move on to some statistics. So we begin, and we did these statistics for the squad as a whole when we introduced kind of all the candidates. Now we're doing it just for the top 26 players. So the average age on the squad is 27.9, and that is high. And actually, no surprise, as we saw, they brought in 4 veterans, basically, raising the average age of the squad. The average overall, and I've done more than 2/3 of the teams now, is 27. So 27.9, very high. However, ironically, they only have one player who's over 33 years old, and that's the goalkeeper they brought back, Eamon Mathlouthi. So he's 38 years old. But beyond that, the next oldest player is 32. However, they do have 8 players. Well, I'll actually show the graphic here. 8 players who are 32, over 30 years old. Again, that's not very old, and no problem there. So actually, an interesting age structure there. At the other end, we have 2 players who are 22 or younger, and that is Anis Ben Slimane or Slimane, and Hannibal Medjbri, both of them under 22. So yeah, that's the spread of ages. We won't talk too much about that. Let's move on to average caps, and that is 37.9. And the average among all the teams is 34.2, so slightly above average in terms of experience. And the most veteranish player is, the most veteran player is the captain, Msakni, Yusuf Msakni, and he has 88 caps. We have Ali Malou with 83 and Ferjani Zati with 78. We'll just give the top 3 there, but we have quite a few players in the 60s and 70s. At the other end, we only have 2 players with less than 10 caps, although we do have 3 players who have just 10 caps. But Nadir Gandri, the central defender there with 8 caps, and Eamon Daman, the goalkeeper, challenging for a starting position with just 5 caps. And we did mention that those new goalkeepers don't have a lot of caps. In fact, I don't see the other goalkeeper here. So anyway, I'm just going to move on. Let's talk about total goals, and they have 105 goals among them, and the total goals per cap is 10.7. This is a little statistic that we came up with in order to compare teams. So total goals 105 is quite low. The average is 119.1, and the average goals per caps is 13.5. So Tunisia's 10.7 is also quite low, though there are teams lower, below 10%, who struggle more to score goals. But a bit of a struggle for Tunisia to get goals here. Let's look at who is getting goals, and we have Wabi Kazri at the top in terms of goal ratio, with 24 goals in 72 games. So that is 1 goal every 3 games, or 33%. And actually, the forward, Safadine Jaziri, is slightly higher with 10 goals in 29 games, or 34%. But the next highest then is a few players at 20%. So Yusuf Msakni there, Issam Jabali, the secondary striker, and interesting, Ali Abdi, the defender. So yes, a bit of a struggle getting goals. 33% for a forward is is okay. That's decent, but not impressive. And they're not. They are getting goals from some other players on the field, but not that much. So maybe need to try to up their goals in order to do well. Okay, let's move on to the summary section of the podcast. So we'll begin with notable non-selections, and actually we don't have anybody in that category. So we'll move on to surprise inclusions, and that's made up basically of the veterans who were called back at the very end there, goalkeeper Ayman Mathlouthi and goalkeeper Muez Hassan, and also central defenders Dylan Braun and no, we didn't put Meria in this list because he had been out injured. So it shouldn't have been as much as a surprise to us as it was. It was a long-term injury, but we should have. Well, we did actually say he was a possibility, but again, we didn't emphasize it enough. Wajdi Kashrida, though, the right back, another of those veterans surprisingly brought back. Next category is new players, but we don't have any players that were added to the list beyond those veterans who we didn't cover in the previous podcast because they had been off the squad. Let's go with an update on injuries, and actually this is where Yassine Mariah should be. So we have him as recovered from his cruciate ligament injury and back on the squad. So it'll be interesting to see whether he makes a bid for recovering his starting position. We also have Taha Yassin Khanisi. We'll put him in this category as recovered from an injury, but what he really recovered from was a doping ban from October 2020 to January 2022. So he returned in March and has been back for a while, the forward. But Taha Yassin Khanisi serving out his time on that ban. We have the next category for injuries is injury doubts. So that's players who are kind of coming into the tournament injured, but they were still kept on the roster. We don't have anyone on Tunisia fitting into that category. Players dropped due to injury. The only one we have here is goalkeeper Farouk Ben Mustafa. And he had a cruciate ligament injury from the June games going forward. However, he did kind of recover in time for to be selected for the Cup. So we're kind of thinking that the injury really didn't play a role in his non-selection and that he simply wasn't selected. Again, they have quite a few goalkeepers to choose from. And finally, injured but not a strong candidate. And we mentioned during the podcast Johan Tuzgar, but again, he was pretty much off the squad, and we talked about him earlier on. So we're ready to move on to predicted starters here. So I have reposted the list from above and removed the highlights that had shown whether they were on the squad. Now the highlights will mean that we see them as starters. So we do see Jalal Kadri, the manager, as a starter. So goalkeepers, the candidates are Bashir Ben Said and Ayman Daman and Muez Hassan and Ayman Mathlouthi. And we had in the previous podcast nominated by Ben Said as the starter, but maybe we should have been a bit more doubtful when Ayman Daman came in for those June games. Now it actually looks like Daman is in favour based on the evidence of the recent friendlies in September and November. But we wouldn't be surprised if it switched back to Ben Said. And actually, we're beginning to wonder if it's more Tunisia's strategy to rotate players, because we're going to see in a lot of the positions that two players are kind of equally playing it, two or more players. So we kind of tentatively stick with Ben Said here. No, we're going to put them as rotating, or it could mean that either one is possible. But who knows what role the two returning veterans might play. I suggested that they might be almost goalkeeping coaches, but you never know. They might actually start themselves. Okay, central defenders, we have Montasar Talbi and Bilal Ifa, Nader Gandri, Dylan Braun, and Yassine Meria. but all of them kind of have a claim to be the starter. We went with Talby and Aoife. It looked that way in June, that they would be the two starters, but our ideas got blown up there. It looks as if Talby will be a starter, so we're going to stick with that one. But Aoife was replaced in the recent friendlies. And really, it could be any one of the other four, Gandry, Braun, or Meria, all have a good bid. I personally think it's going to be Braun, but I don't really have, that's not really an evidence-based comment, so I won't put it down here. But effectively, all of those players in yellow, well, maybe I'll do that just for a bit of fun. Could be any one of them. Never know with Tunisia. Okay, left backs, we have Ali Abdi and Ali Maloul, and the position rotated, as I said, among Abdi, Maloul, and Haddadi, who was not selected. But then Abdi and Maloul each started one of the recent friendlies, and an out-of-position player started the other. So we didn't get any light shed on that, so we have to put them as kind of equally possible. Perhaps rotating, or perhaps it means one will be selected, but we don't know who it is. For right backs, we have candidates Mohamed Drager and Wajdi Kashrida. And in that position, we had nominated Drager as the starter. That seemed pretty clear in June, but then veteran Kashrida's return, who himself had been a starter in the past, could offer a challenge. But we're going to be bold and stick with Mohamed Drager as the starter there. Okay, defensive midfielders. We have Ferjani Sassi, and after a string of starts in June, we felt Sassi was working his way into a starting position. However, he started only one of the recent games and then was on the bench for the other two. So we have to view him as a sometimes starter here. And that's very much the case in the central midfield with players rotating in and out. For central midfielders, again, in the previous podcast, the full-length podcast, we had nominated Ben Slimane and Leidouni as the starters. But we did note that Ben Slimane was increasingly starting as a right attacking midfielder. Leidouni has remained fairly consistent, so we are going to nominate him as a starter. But it was actually scary in the recent friendlies coming in, and so we're tempted to nominate him as a starter too. And we will, because they're really kind of our three positions in the midfield. They usually go with the 4-3-3. As to who the third one will be, again, it could be any one of these. It could be Ben Romdane or Galen Chilali. I personally think Galen Chilali is a bit more possible than Ben Romdane, but we can't be sure. But we'll just leave it blank for now. Okay, left and right midfielders, there are no candidates. The left wing or left attacking midfielder, kind of the attacking left quadrant of the field, we have Naeem Sliti and Yusuf Msakni. So we did have Sliti as a starter, though not necessarily in this position. So he moved out of this position to make way for Msakni, but he continued to start in other positions. So we're going to nominate Sliti as a starter, and Msakni does seem to hold down this left attacking position now. So we're going to regard them both as starters. Okay, in the forward position, we start with attacking midfield. Oh, hang on, we didn't do right wingers. Well, there are no candidates here because it's attacking midfielders and forwards who play this position. So it'll be one of the players we're talking about upcoming here. For attacking midfielders, we have Wabi Kazri and Hannibal Mejbri. And Wabi Kazri, as I said, only starts about half the time, or at least in the period that we've just covered, which is only from the 2022 African Cup in January to now to November of this year. But honestly, we can only consider him a sometime starter, although I wouldn't be surprised if fans are surprised by that and it turns out we're dead wrong. But just going on the evidence that we have, a sometime starter. We did note that Mejbri started the most recent game, but Ben Slimani has a firmer grip on the position of attacking midfielder, but not enough to call him a starter either. But we are going to go back and say Ben Slimani will be a sometime starter because he plays in central and attacking midfield. Unfortunately, Hannibal Mejbri, who I hope gets onto the field, we see as just a substitute. Okay, and secondary striker Issam Jabali is not a starter but a substitute. And forwards, sorry, I just got to get back to my spot here. Forwards, okay, so we had nominated Jaziri as the starter, but his grip was always a bit tenuous in the face of Khazri and Kanisi. All three of them started one of the recent friendlies. I think that decision was made by the manager solely to confuse me. Anyway, it was all three of them in the recent friendlies, Khazri in the most recent November game. Perhaps I'm taking things a little too personally there. Anyway, it could be any one of them, but this really could be a position that is rotated and, a starting position up for grabs to whoever shows form by putting the ball into the net. So we do kind of genuinely consider this one a rotating position. So we will highlight Jaziri, Kanisi, and we already had Wabi Khazri highlighted in yellow. So yes, I know that seems very kind of indecisive, but really, the evidence kind of does point towards rotation or kind of doesn't point towards a clear starter. All right, well, we're finishing the mediacast with some closing thought, and rather than discussing their prospects all again, as we did in the team podcast, we're going to focus on the question, does the selection change our opinion of their chances in this cup? And the answer is no. There's not a lot of changes here. A few players, veterans brought back, which was a surprise, but that's probably for the better. The fact that we don't really know who's starting, I don't think that really makes a big difference. And so, no, we give them the same chances that we had given them in the past. And that actually is kind of a struggling chance to pass the group stage. So Tunisia will do very well to pass the group stage here, and let's see how they do in the cup. All right, well, that brings us to the end of this podcast, so please keep an eye on us at Soccerphiles Canada. That is Soccerphiles with a PH in the middle and an S at the end. And actually, you can begin your navigation with the show notes. We have links to our website and previous podcasts, and we're now working on playlists on YouTube so that you can check out the whole category. For example, you see all of the update podcasts in one place, or all of the player podcasts in one place, something like that. So we hope that makes it easier for you, and that you'll keep watching our mediacast. Meanwhile, see you, and we hope we'll see you for the next team that we cover. Bye-bye.